Welcome to the DVERT Brief. I'm Dr. Meg McBride, Director of the Domestic Violent Extremism Research and Translation Center at CNA. This podcast series highlights new research, trends, and findings on violent extremism in America. Designed for policymakers, practitioners, and anyone curious about the evolving domestic threat landscape, this AI-generated podcast delivers concise and accessible summaries of our latest work. Thanks for listening.
In today's episode, we'll be exploring key insights from our report, BTAM, the Interagency Approach. Let's dive in.
All right, let's jump straight into this discussion on Behavioral Threat Assessment and Management, or BTAM. Now, for anyone maybe not working with this day in, day out, could you just briefly explain what BTAM is?
Absolutely. So think of BTAM as an evidence-based systematic process for identifying, assessing, and managing potential threats of violence. That's the definition from DHS's Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships, or CP3.
Okay, identify, inquire, assess, manage. Got it. And what's really interesting here is how guidance, like the recent 2024 guide from the U.S. Secret Service, frames how you actually build these capabilities effectively. It outlines two main approaches to managing a BTAM program. There's the sole management model, pretty much what it sounds like. One agency handles everything, holds all the control. But then there's the interagency model, and this one is all about collaboration, partnership, sharing resources, and the report we're digging into today, it really zeroes in on why understanding this interagency way of working in practice is so important.
So it challenges that idea that one central body is always the best way?
Precisely. It suggests maybe that's not always the most effective route, and that's where Wood County, Ohio comes in as this fantastic real-world example, a living blueprint, really.
Okay. Wood County, Ohio. So this is our real-world laboratory, as you said. What makes their setup, their network, such a compelling case study for violence prevention, especially, I think the report mentions, for juveniles?
Yeah, Wood County is a prime example of a highly complex, really layered network. It's an incredible example of how a community can genuinely knit together a safety net, okay? We're talking partners across county, state, even national levels, all coordinating. Think organizations like the Wood County Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board. It's working alongside community mental health groups, public schools, the juvenile court system, Ohio Homeland Security, DHS, even nonprofits like Sandy Hook Promise, which focuses on gun violence prevention, and interestingly, tech companies that help facilitate secure data sharing between everyone.
That is a lot of different players involved. How did the research team even begin to untangle all those connections and figure out who's doing what?
Well, during the evaluation that CNA conducted, they did 27 detailed interviews with practitioners working across these different organizations. And that let them map out the interactions, who talks to whom, who collaborates with whom. And a really fascinating finding popped out. The Wood County Alcohol, Drug Abuse, and Mental Health Services Board turned out to be both the most influential, meaning it's well-connected to other well-connected organizations, and the most connected organization overall in that whole network. And crucially, they also found that one of the schools, designated school number 1 in the report, and DHSCP3, were also right up there in the top 5 for both influence and connectedness.
That really highlights the role of schools, doesn't it? And federal support.
Exactly. It underscores how vital they both are in this kind of ecosystem.
So, okay, bringing this back to the practical level. If I'm a local policymaker, or maybe a practitioner on the ground, or even just someone in a community wanting to improve safety, what are the big actionable takeaways here? What can we learn from Wood County for prevention and policy in, my own backyard?
Right. That's the key question, isn't it? And the Wood County experience really points to two major implications. First, it powerfully shows the value of leveraging existing relationships and actively building new connections.
Okay, so not necessarily starting from scratch.
Exactly. Their prevention capabilities didn't just spring up because they created some big new single controlling agency. No, it grew organically, building on what was already there, connecting existing services, existing people. And that's a huge point because it suggests these efforts can often get started without needing, a massive flood of new funding. It's about optimizing existing resources first.
That's a really powerful message. Work with what you have. But just knowing people isn't enough, right? How do you make those connections actually effective? I imagine coordination is key.
You've hit on it. And that leads straight to the second major implication: the critical need to create robust ways, actual mechanisms for coordination and information sharing.
Okay, so what does that look like?
This means making intentional choices about what threat assessment model to use, or actively investing in things like a data sharing platform or clear data sharing protocols so threat assessment teams can collaborate effectively. It might even mean developing specific interagency communication channels, like having dedicated liaison roles.
Okay, so practical structure.
Yes, practical structures. But, and this is critical, it has to be built on a very clear framework for sharing information, one that guarantees confidentiality and data security. Protecting privacy is paramount. But it also needs to ensure that potential cases don't just fall through the cracks because information couldn't be shared appropriately.
So it's about smart, secure sharing, not just opening the floodgates.
Precisely. It's a careful balance.
The Wood County model really does challenge us to think differently about community safety. It strongly suggests that successful targeted violence prevention isn't about isolated silos or just top-down orders. It really seems to emerge from these robust, interconnected networks that cleverly leverage local resources and foster genuine collaboration.
It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What sort of protective web could your community build? This podcast was produced with the assistance of artificial intelligence tools, but the content was based on research done by the DVERT Center, which is housed within CNA, a nonprofit research and analysis organization dedicated to advancing the safety and security of the nation. The research on which this podcast is based was supported by the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate. Adaptation of this research for the DVERT Brief was supported by the National Institute of Justice. The views and conclusions contained in this podcast are those of the authors and should not be interpreted as necessarily representing the official policies, either expressed or implied, of DHS, S&T, or the National Institute of Justice.